So, hi, everybody. I'm Krista Cowan. I'm the corporate genealogist here at Ancestry. And joining me today is Angie Bush from Ancestry Pro Genealogists. And you are all in for a treat today. Today, Angie is going to be teaching us all about how to find our hidden female ancestors. We'll set that problem up in just a minute. But, Angie, thank you so much for being here. Do you want to tell us just a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. So I am, as Krista mentioned, I am at Ancestry Pro Genealogist. I usually talk about DNA. That's kind of my specialty, what I'm known for. Some of you may have seen me around. That's what I usually answer questions about. But today, we're going to talk about finding those hidden female ancestors. As probably many of you, I grew up hearing stories and listening to my grandmothers tell stories about their childhood and growing up, and had that relationship with my grandmothers. Maybe not so much my grandfathers, but definitely with my grandmothers. So I'm excited to talk about some of the techniques and things that you can do to find those hidden female ancestors in your family tree, to find their origins, to find where they are from and what their stories are.
Fantastic. Well, I'm excited to hear the tips you have to share. Just to set the problem up for everybody a little bit, for those of you who are new to family history, you may not have yet encountered this, but those of us who have been doing this for a while, women are often some of our biggest brick walls. And that's because through most periods of time and history, different places around the world, different cultures, women traditionally are the ones who change their names, sometimes repeatedly. They go from having what is traditionally called a maiden name, or the name of their father. In some cultures, they have the name of both a father and a mother. And then as they get married, their name changes. And if they marry multiple times, that name may change multiple times. So if you're going from yourself back in time, which is how we recommend working on your family tree, you're going to start with yourself, and you're going to put in what you know about your parents and your grandparents. And one of the things we've discovered here at Ancestry is that more than 53% of people can't name all four of their grandparents. And by that, we mean like the full name of grandma, including her maiden name. That's something that not everybody knows. And so you, as you're working your way back in your tree, you know her married name because that's the family you're tracing. But to connect her to her family of origin, you have to know her maiden name. Now, the same thing happens when you get back in time and you start tracing families back down the family tree, which is you have daughters in families and you know their maiden name, and then sometimes you don't know who they marry, and so you lose them in the latter part of their life because of that. And so that's kind of the problem in family history, that if you haven't encountered it yet, you will, which is this concept of losing women, particularly because of those changes of names. So Angie, let's go ahead and dive in and have you just share your tips. I'm going to keep an eye on the Q&A while you're sharing, and I may interrupt you occasionally with some pertinent questions from the audience, but I'm excited to hear what you have to share.
Sounds good. Let me just get this share button going. Make sure I'm on the right screen. There we go. Okay. I hope let me move this out
Yeah,
of the
I
way.
can see
There's a
your
little
screen, so
zoom.
we're good.
Okay, wanted to make sure I could also move the little zoom bar out of the way. So a couple of key concepts that you have to think about when you are researching women in your family tree. So you have to think about how her life would have intersected with governmental or religious authorities. So when she got married, how did she intersect with the government? If she was married and her husband died, what did they do with her property, and how did she interact with that as she was either selling his property or working out her own property? You also, and this is really, really big, you have to study women in the context of the men in their lives. So you have to find their fathers-in-law, their brothers-in-law, their sons. all of those men in their lives, you also have to study them there because that's where you're going to find them interacting. And sometimes you may run into a situation where all you find is that your ancestor was Mrs. John Smith. And that may be as far as you can go. But hopefully, with some of the tips that I'll share today, you'll be able to find those families of origin for the women in your family tree, and then also be able to trace them forward, like Krista was talking about, into those who they married and what happened after they married. Okay, let's see. We'll go to this one. Okay, so as you dig into the records, one thing that you really want to make sure to do is to search like a pro. So Krista just did a webinar about this a couple weeks ago. It's up on the education page. There are tons of tips and tricks and techniques that she provided in that webinar. You want to make sure that you are searching like a pro and using those tips and the techniques that she outlined in that. The other thing that's really important, and this is something Krista covered, was to search specific collections, and then also always, unless it's not available, obtain and look at the original record. Don't just look at the index. So I have a quick little example here from some of my favorite types of records. I wish I had ancestors in Australia because their death records, death certificates are fantastic. So I'm just going to do a little example here. I'm searching for the death of a woman named Anne Uther. I know that she died in 1894, so I'm going to put that in the search box. And I'm going to leave some of the rest of this blank for now and just see what I get. And obviously, you know, I've set this up in advance, so I know what I'm going to get. But here on Ancestry, all we have is the death index. So that just is going to have the person's name, the year that her death was registered, and where it was registered. So as we see that she died in 1894 in Sydney, and that her father's name was Lancelot. But we also have another key piece of information, her registration number. And we can write and obtain her actual death certificate. And I always recommend doing this, even if you don't end up seeing that much additional information. Always look at that original record. There can be hidden clues in that original record. So in this case, we have Anne's original death certificate, which is just a fantastic treasure trove of information. So here is Anne's actual death certificate. So you can see in Australia, one of the things that they do that is just so fantastic is they record and identify all of the children in the marriage. So here we have all of the names of Anne's children and the married names of her daughters with their ages. So this record, if you have ancestors in Australia, get their death records because you are just going to find so much information on those records. And this one is courtesy of our friend and colleague, Michelle Patient, who is in New Zealand. But you also see Anne's name at death here. We see her father, it says it asks for the name and occupation of the father and the name and maiden surname of her mother. So actually Lancelot was her father's first name. His surname is Iredell. They didn't know her mother's name, but he was an ironmonger, and you see that. It also shows here how long she was in the Australian colonies. And she was born in Newcastle on Tyne in England. And she had been in New South Wales for 67 years. So this gives you even more information. You know where she was born, about when she arrived in Australia, and you can take that information and then go continue to search her family in England. Okay, I'll pause just for a second, Krista, because my
Yes.
guess is there's some questions here.
There are, and also my mind is blown because I've never actually seen an original death certificate from Australia. And the fact that it has all of the children listed, that's amazing with their married names. I'm just blown away. Now I want all my ancestors to be from Australia,
Me too.
even
Me
though
too.
none of them are.
Yep.
Okay, we do have a few questions, and I do just want to clarify a couple of things. So, what Angie has just shown you all is that when you are researching back in time, up your family tree, you always want to start with the more recent records first. And so a death record is going to be the most recent record in time. Now, wherever possible, Ancestry tries to get those original death certificate images, but not all jurisdictions will allow us to have those. Lots of different privacy laws. So here in the US, every state has different privacy laws. Overseas, every country has different privacy laws. So in the case of New South Wales, for example, the example that Angie's sharing here, we have an index to these records because that's what the government was willing to allow us to put online, but you then use that index to order a copy of the original record itself. And it's the same in most places. Now, one of the questions I did see come through was, who can order that death certificate? Again, that depends on the location. So every location is going to have different laws regarding whether those records are open or closed. Even if they're closed, sometimes an immediate family member, a child or a spouse or a sibling, sometimes a grandchild, can ask or order a copy of that record. Sometimes if they're open, anyone can order a copy of that death record. But you want to get your hands on that because as Angie's demonstrated here, these records oftentimes have so much more information than what was included on the index that was provided to Ancestry to publish online. So look for those death certificates. Always, of course, look for the index online at Ancestry. There are lots of other places where you can look for clues about deaths, tombstones, obituaries, other family members. Oftentimes their obituaries will list if somebody predeceased them or survived them. So that starts to give you time frames that you can look for those. But looking for those death records and then getting your hands on that original is going to give you a huge leg up. Maybe not as beautifully as Australia does, but in helping to find more information about the maiden and married names of those women in that family.
Exactly. Exactly. All right. So, my next big tip is you want to examine the original records created for all of a woman's children because you don't know which of those records might name her or provide her maiden surname or her family of origin. So you want to look at, if you can, if they were created. I know in the United States, for example, birth records don't start in earnest until the early 20th century for most places. But if you have that, look at those. You may not have a birth record, but if you do, definitely look at it for all the children, or perhaps a woman had several children and those younger children have birth records, but the older ones don't. So consider that too in your search. Also, determine what religion your ancestors were, and if your ancestors were baptized or christened. Oftentimes, especially I see this in Catholic sacramental records in Mexico and other places, you will find that they name not only the mother, but they name the grandparents, and you have all four of the grandparents on those records. So look at those religious records as well. Again, look at the marriage records, both civil and religious. And the reason you want to look at religious records, if you can, is again, those witnesses, and there might be witnesses that are related, and then there also might be other information about their parents and grandparents, and may have named 2 or 3 generations of ancestors within that record. The other thing I really like about marriage records or marriage licenses is oftentimes the people that are getting married, if you're lucky enough to be in a jurisdiction or a time and a place, they would have had to have supplied the names of their parents. So the people getting married are going to have to say who their parents were. And they're going to know who their parents are in most cases, unless mom died really, really young and they just don't remember. But people are most of the time going to know their parents. And so marriage records often have great information. Death records. Like we just saw with this example of Anne, how much information is on that death record for her. So look for those death records. Another kind of ethnic or specialty clue here is if you have Jewish ancestors, look at the tombstone. Look at the headstone and get transliteration of the names. If there are names inscribed in Hebrew on that tombstone, that will often give you clues to a woman's parents and her maiden name. So look at those headstones or those tombstones, especially if you're Jewish. And then my favorite type of one of my most favorite type of records, and we'll talk about these a little bit more in just a second, are applications for Social Security. So everyone in the 30s and 40s, if you were working in the United States, and this just applies to the United States, you had to fill out an application, say where you were born, and name your parents on the application. We'll look at an example in a minute. But again, this is another record where the applicant, the person that you're researching, had to supply the names of both of their parents. So if you're researching in the US in the 20th century, get those Social Security applications and get them for all of the children. If you find your ancestors all on a census record, or your female ancestor on a census record, you know she had 8 children, and you've only researched your direct ancestor, not all 8 children, get those Social Security applications for all of the children and see who it names and what it provides as the maiden name for the mother. Um, so wanted to search, just show another quick example of searching in Ancestry's collections for a marriage record and the information that you can find. So we'll go back just a step. So Ancestry has great, this is in New York, Ancestry have great extracted indices for New York vital events, for births, marriages, and deaths. In this case, we're going to see again that the original record, we're looking for a man named Joseph Mara. They married in 1921. The index has some information here, has his wife's name and all of this information, but this just gives us the information about their marriage. It doesn't give us all the information. So what we want to do is to find the original. We can do that with this certificate number. And actually in New York, the city, the 5 boroughs they are digitizing all of their vital records, and those are accessible to anyone on their on this website. It's I don't have it. I should have written it down. But anyways, you can get those New York marriage records. I'm guessing Jensen, who's a ProGen person, he can pop that in the chat, because I know that we both look at that all the time. So we have this index here, right? But when we go and we get the actual marriage certificate off of the New York Historical Vital Records site, we see, in this case, we have Joseph's parents, both named. He's a merchant. He was born in Spain. His father's name was Joseph. His mother was Francesca Diaz. His wife is Ruby Gums. She is single. She was born in St. Vincent in the British West Indies. Her father was Emmanuel. Her mother is Georgiana Stowe. And if we look down here, we can see the witnesses to the marriage. Her mom witnessed her marriage. She was there when she got married. So it gives us, again, all of this additional information. And if I want to keep researching Ruby and Georgiana and their family, I can look at getting Georgiana's application for Social Security benefits to see when she applied. So I found that she did apply. And again, we have here in Ancestry this record of her application. And she wrote down her parents' names. Sometimes in this collection, it will give you the parents' names. Other times it won't give you the parents' names. And so you'll have to request it. In this case, we see them in the index, but I don't know what this place is. There's town, St. Vincent. And so in this case, I wanted to order the original record so that I could see what that birthplace was. And so I went ahead and did that and found that this application, this is what it looks like. Sometimes they're a little grainy and hard to read. But as I look at this, where she was born, I can make out, if you just look at St. Vincent a little bit, you'll see that this is Kingstown. And that makes a lot more sense for St. Vincent than something called Theristown. You can also see from this record where she filled this out in August of 1943. Georgiana was unemployed at the time. It gives her address where she was living in New York City. Again, all of this great information that she had to supply herself. So it's highly likely to be accurate. And that's kind of in contrast to death certificates, right? Because you never know who the informant is on a death certificate and if they even knew much about the person that passed away, right? So applications for Social Security and those marriage records, if they actually required that they name their parents, those are two great sources of information. And I'm going to take a pause again, Krista, and see what questions we have.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of questions about how to get your hands on these Social Security applications. So there's two things. The first thing is the Social Security Death Index on Ancestry will give you their death date and their Social Security number. And you can then, if you click on the source citation on Ancestry, there's a more information. At the bottom of that page, there's a database description, and that will explain to you exactly how and where you send in to order a copy of their Social Security application. Now, that said, there's also this other database on Ancestry that Angie was just showing you, the Social Security Claims and Applications Index, where some of the information off of this original application has been transcribed into the index. So if your family member is lucky enough to be included in that particular index, it could list their parents, including their mother's maiden names. So again, anytime you see a record on Ancestry and you want to know more about it, you go to the source information, click more, and then at the bottom of the page, there's always a full source citation about where Ancestry got these records, and then usually a database description that will give you instructions on what to do next in order to order original records like this Social Security application. Another question that's come up has to do with informants. And so it's really interesting because, you know, you can have a question, right? So for example, your little research question could be, who is the mother of, you know, Jane Smith? Well, you could find a record for Jane Smith that lists her mother's name, but it's only as accurate as the informant. So just because it lists a mother doesn't mean it's really her mother, which is one of the reasons why Angie recommended that you search all the children. If you know Jane has 4 siblings, you're going to want to look at all of their records as well to see, is the mother's name consistently reported, or are there inconsistencies? Maybe they all have the same first name but different last names. Maybe different names are given all together. And as you start to dig into that, there's some things that you sometimes discover. Records are only as accurate as the informant, and sometimes the informant, particularly if you think like when somebody has died and you're being asked information about your mother who just died and you're being told to give her mother's maiden name, like you may be confused in your grief and give totally wrong information. Sometimes that's just an innocent mistake. Sometimes it's intentional. Sometimes the differences between information across records is because things are not what you think they are. So a couple of different things that I've seen in records, and Angie can give some examples or back me up on this, I think, which is that sometimes entire families will just take the new surname of their stepfather.
Yep.
And so you see these whole families of children who have this surname. And as you start digging into the record, you're like, well, sometimes they use this surname and sometimes they use this surname. Well, that's because there wasn't a formal requirement for people to change their name prior to when Social Security came into effect. And there was started to be a little bit more structure in the late 1930s and into the 1940s and 50s around name and spellings of names as identification. Prior to to that, it was just a lot looser, both the spelling of name and what name you even chose to go by. And so you'll see families where, again, like a family may use one surname for their birth name and then their stepfather's surname for a period of time. And then some of the children may go back to their birth surname. It just depends. You'll also see sometimes women or anybody giving the name of their stepfather as their father on things like their Social Security application. Um, that also applies to women in your tree. One of the things that happens is when you have high maternal mortality rate, so you have women dying in childbirth or shortly after because of complications due to childbirth, sometimes those men remarried very quickly because they have these large families and they need a woman in the house to help take care of those children. Sometimes those women even have the same first name, Elizabeth, Mary,
Yep.
Jane, and now you've got 6 children in a family, both all with mothers named Elizabeth, but they're 2 different women. And so that may be a reason why you're seeing different last names for the mothers among the children. So you have to kind of work through that. And Angie's advice to identify all the children in a family, find all of their records before you try to move back to the next generation and definitively identify who those parents are is really good advice, because it's going to help you make sure you sort through all of the natural messiness that all families encounter with multiple step parents and new mothers that raised them and informants who just got confused.
Exactly. So, yes, we are going to do a little bit of case study. So I wrote this presentation is kind of loosely based on a blog post that I wrote for the Ancestry blog a couple weeks ago. I think it was published. Anyway, in that post, I went through 7 different strategies for finding female ancestors. You always want to start with family records and stories. Things are going to get passed down. Yes, things can be remembered or recorded wrong, but sometimes it's only that little tidbit of family information that ends up getting you kind of the answer that you're looking for. So start there. Then check common government and religious records, births, christenings, marriages, deaths, or burials. Those records, those vital records, hopefully they may have the information that you're seeking there. Then if those records either weren't kept or you can't locate them, you want to explore probate, land, military, immigration, and other government types of records. So, for example, military pension files for men that fought in wars. Often if a woman was claiming, for example, her husband fought in the Civil War and she's claiming a pension, she's going to have to prove that she was his wife, that she needs this support from the government, and she will supply all kinds of information about their relationship and about oftentimes about her relationship to others. So those military pension files can be amazing, and so can probate and land records. And we're going to see an example of one of those land records in this example I'm going to show in just a minute. Also, you want to search newspapers and social records. What I mean by social records are like county histories, other records that, or other books that kind of wrote about the founding families of a particular place in a particular time. Those records may also have the information that you're seeking about your female ancestors. Always want to review census records really carefully. And we're going to see how reviewing a census record really carefully really was key in this example I'm going to show in a minute. But those census records, especially 1900 and 1910 in the United States, where they asked for additional information about that woman and how many children she had, that can be a clue to go look for some other information about her children or about her family. You want to investigate cemetery records, like we've already talked about. So do that. And then last on the list is you can use DNA testing, but I find DNA testing is often not my go-to. And I say that kind of being a huge proponent of DNA testing, but that's probably the thing that I use last. So anyway, we're going to talk about a woman named Gail Hamilton Penn. Okay. And first step in our process is we're going to start with family records and stories about Gail. Okay. So what we know is that she was born in Ohio, or what they came to us, she was born in Ohio in 1867. She was adopted and raised by her mother's sister, Nancy Curtis Bertolf. And Gail never knew her own mother. Gail was raised with a stepsister, Jessie Bertholf. Gail married Thomas Tinsley in 1885 in Missouri, and she died in Michigan in 1947. When Nancy, her adoptive mother and or aunt, died in 1912, there was a protracted legal battle over Nancy's estate. And I won't get into all the details of that, but those court records and that information from that battle, that court battle, ended up in the documents. It talked about how Nancy left 1/3 of her estate to her stepdaughter, Jessie. And it specifically said that Jessie was not her natural daughter, meaning that Jessie was not biologically related to her, but 2/3 of her estate went to her niece, Gail H. Tinsley. Okay, so this is kind of the basics of the family information that we know. And so I wanted to first kind of back up this family information by finding those either birth, marriage, christening records, death records that I could find. Okay, so the first one I looked at was Gail's marriage record on the Ancestry. So we look at this, and as we open up the actual record, we can see Gail married. And it says T.R. Tinsley. He was 33 years old. Gail Hamilton Penn is over 17, but she must have been younger than 18 because N.A. Bertholf, so Nancy, had to give her permission. She states on this record that she is the mother of Gail Hamilton Penn by adoption. So that's all checking out with our family story, that Gail was adopted by Nancy Bertholf, that she was her adoptive mother. So it doesn't, unfortunately, give us too much, sorry about that, too much other information. We get these ages, we don't get birthplaces, and we know that N.A. Bertholf, Nancy Bertholf, is her mother by adoption. And that's what that record tells us. Also wanted to look at Gail's death certificate. Sadly, this death certificate was one that didn't give us a whole lot of additional information. It did show us that Gail was born in Ohio, but it didn't give us any information about her parents. They were both unknown. Their birthplace and their name were both listed as unknown. So the informant, who I believe was her son, yes, her son, he didn't know anything about her parents or their origins, or at least he didn't supply that information for her death certificate. Okay. So then I wanted to look at Nancy and also kind of verify the information on Nancy. Again, there isn't a lot of information here. There is some. It tells us that, Nancy and William married, and they had a little bit of a recording error. They put the person who married them in this line instead of her husband, who is William W. Bertholf. He is, all it says is that he's more than 21 years. So it doesn't give us his exact age, and that Nancy A. Curtis is more than 18 years of age. Again, it doesn't give us their exact ages. And this took place in March 1860 in Warren County, Ohio. Okay, so that's where they were married. So I have a place, and I know that I've got Nancy in Warren County in 1860. Then, as I mentioned, kind of from the family information that we had, we knew that Nancy had a second husband, and that there was this legal battle over the estate when she died. So I wanted to see if her marriage to George Terry, if that provided any additional information for us, because perhaps because it was later, it was in 1910 in California, I thought, well, maybe we'll get some additional information about her origins or something like that. So Again, looking, and this is actually just an index still. It's not quite the original record, but it has enough information on it that we can see. George Terry, Naomi, and now she's going by Naomi. And I'm not sure why that name changed. She's not Nancy at this point. She's Naomi Bertholf, married George Terry. They were both residents of Los Angeles. Okay. And the other thing that it tells us in this record, as we go down here, is they're both widowed. So he's a widowed and she is a widow. He has been married 3 times and she has been married. This is her second marriage. So his third marriage, her second, he was born in Canada. She was born in Virginia. Okay. All right. So we get all of that information. And then I also looked at Nancy's death certificate. This was another one that we have great information on Ancestry as far as the index goes, and that when she died, but we actually had to go get her death certificate elsewhere, which I'll show you momentarily. Okay, I'm going to close these windows all out so that I don't get too many open. All right, so to summarize, what we know from those records. So the marriage record confirmed Gail is Nancy's daughter by adoption, but there's no information about Gail's parents on her death certificate. And what we're looking for is Gail's origins. That's the goal. Nancy also used the name Naomi. She was born in Virginia. At least it looks that way from the information she supplied on her second marriage record. She married William Bertholf in Warren County, Ohio, and that was supposedly her first marriage. We get that information from that marriage in California, right? And then we got her death certificate, and it had one little piece of information that I kind of initially discounted, and the family initially discounted this information too. It said the name of her father was Van Andre, which I thought was weird. I'm like, what name is this? Van Andre? She was born in Virginia. Oh, okay.
And is it
I've never.
Is it Van Andre or is it Van Andre?
Right? I don't know. And the family discounted it too, because as you can see here, the name George Terry, he was the informant, right? And we know there was a protracted legal battle out of her estate. Basically, he wanted her whole estate and thought that she should get it. And the daughters came back, Jesse and Gail came back and said, no, she gave her estate to us. But so there was this battle over it. And so I thought to myself, is George Terry actually even going to be accurate about anything? What does he know about her? Right? He's only been married to her for 2 years. They got married in 1910. She dies in 1912. So kind of thought, what does he know? But as you'll see, hopefully momentarily, that was really important to have that there. That information was pretty key. The next thing I wanted to do was kind of also trace Gail and Nancy through census records. I'm going to show you a handful of the census records that we traced them through. So the first one, well, not the first one that we looked at, but we looked at the 1870 census. Okay, so the 1870 US Census, it does not give you relationships, but we see William Bertholf here, Nancy or Nanny here. She, in this record, it notes that she was born in Ohio. He was born in New York. He is an agent for a liquor store. Again, they're in Warren County, which is where she married him. We have this woman, Elizabeth, 73 years old. It notes, kind of interestingly, that she's a relative and that she was born in Virginia. Then we have Jessie, who we already know about, who's the stepdaughter. She's here. She's attending school. She was born in Georgia. And then we have Gail Penn, who is 2 years old. She's just at home, and she was born in Ohio. Okay. So that's the information we have from the 1870 census. By 1880, 10 years later, we have Gail and Nancy living in Columbus, Ohio. I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit because it's a little bit hard to see. They're living in Columbus, Ohio. And she is kind of operating a boarding house. Nana, now her name is Nana instead of Nancy. And she doesn't have, she's widowed here in this column. And it says that Gail is her adopted daughter in this column. We go over, it tells us that Nancy's parents, Nancy was born in Virginia, her parents were born in Virginia, and we have Gail born in Ohio, her father born in Maryland, and her mother born in Virginia. Okay. And then the other census I looked at was the 1860 census, just after Nancy married William Bertholf, just to see where they were living. And interestingly enough, although they married in Warren County in just in March of that year, a couple months later, they were when the census was taken, they were living in Louisville. Again, he's a railroad agent. He was born in New York. She was born in Virginia. Okay. So from these census records, we get some additional information. You want to check again those census records carefully. But what we get from them is that Nancy or Naomi was born probably between 1832 and 1833 in Virginia or Ohio. And I see things like this where it's some records say Virginia, some records say Ohio. To me, that's sometimes a little bit of a clue that they were born in Virginia, but migrated at a very young age to Ohio. At least that's what I tend to think. We also have Gail's mother born in Virginia and then her father born in Maryland. So it kind of indirectly supports that Gail is Nancy or Naomi's daughter by adoption, and that Gail's mother was Nancy's sister. It indirectly supports that just a little bit. It's not proof of anything, but it's supportive of it. So we also know that William died between 1870 and 1880, and that sometime between then, Gail and Nancy moved from Warren County to Columbus during this time. So I looked at all of this, and because the place that I had found them and I knew that they were was Warren County, Ohio. That was in 1860 and 1870. They were in Warren County, and I thought from this information, Gail was the daughter of probably Nancy's sister. So I went and I looked at every single Curtis family that looked like they'd migrated from Virginia to Ohio in Warren and the surrounding counties. And I traced all of those Curtis families because I'm assuming that the marriage to William Bertholf is Nancy's first marriage. I threw everything that I could find against that. And I pulled out all the stops to find these Curtis families. And I also looked for Penn families in and around Warren County, Ohio. And basically, at the end of the day, I came up empty, came up completely empty. So then I went back and wanted to ground myself a little bit more in the research. And in that 1870 census, because there was some interesting information here that I needed to kind of stay focused on. The first piece of information was that we had William Bertholf born in New York, but we had this older woman, Elizabeth, who was a relative and born in Virginia. And so I wanted to see, was Elizabeth William Bertholf's relative, or was she perhaps Nancy's relative, right? So I first researched those men. Remember, if you're going to research women, you have to research the men that they're associated with. So I researched William, documented his family, found that his mother was not named Elizabeth, and that all of his family members were still in New York. It turns out that he died in Columbus in January of 1873. He had been drinking very heavily for the previous 4 to 5 weeks and was found passed out on the street in Columbus. And it states in the article where they found him that the only family that he had were his wife, and that was it. All the rest of his family was in New York. And he was basically destitute. He had no money. Okay. So there was nothing that he left to Nancy in terms of any kind of property or land or anything like that. But they had already moved to Columbus by 1873. And then my other question is, well, what happened to Jessie? Where did she go? Between William's death, when he died in 1873, and then when she married, I knew that she was married by 1880. So what happened to her? Because again, you want to research all of a woman's children, even if they're stepchildren. You want to research all of the children in the family. Okay. So I searched all over for Gail and Nancy, and it turns out there's this woman, Mary Abigail Dodge. She used the pen name Gail Hamilton. So anytime I tried to find Gail Hamilton pen or Gail pen in newspapers, I couldn't find anything because the names were just too common. And I had this prolific writer named Gail Hamilton who was writing everything at that time. And so finding Gail was hard. Finding Nancy was also difficult, but I was able to find Jessie. Remember, I'm like going after her too. And I found her a listing of students at the Antioch School in Monroe County, Ohio. So Warren County, Ohio is kind of in the southwest corner of Ohio, kind of down by Cincinnati. And Monroe County, Ohio is kind of on the other side of the state. It borders West Virginia. It's not like it's a big city, Perry Township, Monroe County. It's kind of a small country place. But what I find is Jessie Bertholf from Columbus, Ohio. And this is 1873, so just a few months after William's death, attending school in Monroe County, Ohio. And then I also noticed right below her, there was somebody named Alice Penn also attending school there. And I thought that was really weird. Why is Jessie going to Monroe County, Ohio? If it was, if Nancy was destitute and she needed to, put the girls in an orphanage or something, those orphanages are going to be in Columbus, not in Monroe County. So I kind of made the assumption or thought that maybe Jessie's in Monroe County because that's where Nancy's family is. Her family's actually from Monroe County, not Warren County, where I thought they were from, because that's where Nancy married, and that's where Nancy was living in 1870. So I looked at Jessie Berghoff. The other thing that's interesting is there's also a student with the last name of Hamilton. And then there's also this student here, W.T. Bottenfield. And I knew from family information that W.T. Bottenfield was Jessie's husband, actually. And had also looked at his obituary, which gave us some more information. So it talks about how he was born in Monroe County when he married Jessie and all of their children. So I knew, well, I didn't know, but I thought to myself, I got to look at Monroe County. That's where I think I'm going to find my answers. Problem with Monroe County is that it's a burned county. So there were courthouse fires in 1840 and in 1867. And 1867 is about the time period I really, really need to research. But there are some land records and some other things in Monroe County that I was able to look at. I came across as I was researching. And I'm not gonna. We'll do another lecture at some point on land and probate records. I'm sure Krista will have somebody with that. We'll do that at some point. But as I was researching, I found this key deed. So Elizabeth Van Ander, what was the name on that death certificate? Does anyone remember? Do you remember, Krista? That Van Andre, right?
Oh, yes.
But Elizabeth and her children sell their property, and this was recorded on June 2nd, 1854. So it names all of her children: Jacob and Clorinda Yost, Mitchell and Isabel Huffman, Susanna Trout. I'm probably butchering that. We have Nancy Van Ander, Mary Ann Van Ander, Henry and Alcinda Garrett of Warren County, and we have William H. and Arminda Penn. Like again, you want to, when I saw this, I got chills. I was like, oh my goodness, this is, but I only found this deed after I went back and grounded myself in kind of those two principles of searching for the men and then making sure I was investigating all of the children, right? So I did a little bit more searching to kind of tidy this up. And what do you know? And when we look at the 1850 census for Warren County, what we see are Henry and Alcinda Garrett in Warren County, Ohio, which is where Nancy later married, and Nancy is living with them. She's not actually Nancy Curtis. So at some point, she married someone with the last name of Curtis, but probably she married him in Monroe County, and there are no records for that because they were burned. So why was Elizabeth Van Ander selling all that property? Well, it was because we find in the newspapers and these obituaries that drowned. Mr. John Van Ander, formerly a citizen of this township, was drowned in the backwater of the Ohio River in Jackson Township last week. Okay, we find John Van Ander's family in 1850. Okay, and we've got John Van Ander, Elizabeth, John, Clorinda, Mary, Amanda is how it's written or how it was transcribed. But do you remember back on this 1870 census, this Elizabeth? Here's Elizabeth in 1850, right? So tidied that up, have the headstones, looked at the headstones for them, and then with Arminda or Amanda and William H. Penn, I went searching for them. And what I found was that they divorced. Let's see, it's down here, I'm pretty sure. Here we go. They divorced in 1863. William sued Arminda for divorce. She was residing in the state of Kentucky in 1863. But in the complaint, he sues for divorce because it said that she was committing adultery with Joseph Kincaid on the second day of March 1863 in Antioch in Monroe County. And William was granted that divorce in 1863. So what this told me is that Arminda took on William Penn's name. She just kept it, but that wasn't even, that Gail isn't even biologically related to William because they got divorced, right? So this helps to explain why when I was using DNA testing, the closest match I could find related through Gail was only 38 Son Morgans. I couldn't find any matches who had Curtis, Hamilton, or Penn ancestors in their tree. Well, no wonder, because none of those surnames are biologically connected to Gail. And so sometimes DNA is not the tool that you want to use. I do, however, love using DNA in a couple different this one point. You could use targeted testing to locate other descendants of John and Elizabeth Van Ander for autosomal and mitochondrial DNA testing if you wanted to use DNA to shore this up. But finding females or using DNA to find females, I find that it's best when I have a female that was probably born just after the 1880 census was taken and married just before 1900 because she never appears with her parents on census records. And I have found a lot of women and their families of origin who were kind of fit that criteria. In the UK, you have a similar thing with the 1921 census and the 1939 register. And so I found success with DNA testing in those types of cases. But usually for ancestors that are really far back in your family tree and you're searching for those maiden names, I have found that I find better information in the actual records. So this is kind of our, I'll go ahead and stop that for, so we can look at, and I can finally look at the questions and stuff. So
You have just taken us on a ride, Angie. And the chat is blowing up about how the scandal of it all and how much work you put into that and how fascinated everybody is. So thank you very much for that. All of you, you have just received a master class in not just answering a question that you might have in your family tree, but in how to piece together all of the evidence to come to the correct conclusion. So often we just grab the first record we find that has information, or we make assumptions based on our own biases. But Angie has just really beautifully illustrated exactly how you should be approaching, particularly some of these more difficult questions in your family tree. Several of you, just from following along in the chat, followed along with her with no problem. But for those of you who might be a little newer to this, I would recommend that once this video is available on the website or over on the Ancestry YouTube channel, you go back and you rewatch that section and maybe even get out a notebook and see if you can follow along with Angie for all the steps that she took. Now, Angie, the number one question that came in while you were doing all of that, everybody wants to know what that magnification tool was you were using.
Oh, I have a little, let's see, I have this Logitech Spotlight. And the way, if I share my screen the right way, I can, yeah, it expands or does anything, but it's my presentation remote.
There you go. So it's not something built into Ancestry. It's not
No,
something built into Windows. It's a separate presentation tool that she is using, and it's called a Logitech Spotlight.
it is
There
Logitech
you go.
Spotlight.
Okay.
Yep. My favorite thing.
The next question that we got that I think is probably important for people to understand is, how long did this all take you? Like in hours, maybe.
Well, in hours, once I regrounded myself, instead of just grabbing everything that I could find and looking at all the people named Curtis and had the last name Penn in Ohio, once I stopped flailing, it actually came together pretty quickly. So I would say that, setting it up, um, and finding those initial records that kind of provided the foundation, that and analyzing them, making sure I looked at them appropriately, that probably took me 4 to 5 hours. And then once I regrounded myself and looked at William Bertolf and then looked for Jesse, I would say that probably took another 15 hours. It wasn't terrible, but I spent so much time flailing around because I wasn't grounded in the principles of what I said I needed to do. That's where it took the time. So sometimes, even though I know what I'm supposed to do, it gets easier to just kind of flail around, and you have those biases, like you were talking about. They come in and they just really affect things and make things take longer than they should. So go from what you know. And in this case, that 1870s census was really key. Go from what you know and ground yourself in the last place that you know for sure is accurate, and then go from there. Don't just flail around hoping you'll find something.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of us do that, right? We think if we can just do the right kind of search or just get the right hint or just look at the right database. And that's not the answer to most of our difficult family history
Right.
problems. Sometimes it's just taking a step back, looking at everything you have, and then understanding those basic principles. Look at the men in their lives. Don't make assumptions about things. Recognize that there could have been multiple marriages. Like, you just taught us so many great things. Okay, the last thing I want to share with all of you, because again, I'm seeing this, I know a lot of you are a little bit more intermediate. You were able to keep right up with Angie, but I'm just seeing some really basic questions. So let me just wrap us up with this, which is, as you record information in your family tree, there are two things you want to keep in mind. The first thing is, we always record women in the family tree by their maiden name and their maiden name only. And then as you add their spouses, at least on Ancestry, in Ancestry trees, the system automatically recognizes that she likely used those other surnames at different points in time, and it takes that into account. So you do not need to add a string of additional surnames for her. If you don't yet know her maiden name, just leave the field blank. If you know one of the names of her husband's, but all you know is his last name and not his first name, you can add a spouse with a last name and leave the first name field blank. So if you're using Ancestry as the place where you're just kind of trying to keep information together as you go through this discovery process that Angie so beautifully illustrated, you can do that. You can add no surname, you can add no given name. You can also keep track of notes And then the second thing is when you save a record to your tree, when you find that census record, when you find that death index, when you find that newspaper index to the obituary, whatever it is, don't just save the record without paying attention to exactly what it's adding to your tree. You are the one who has the control over what information gets added to your family tree. If you don't want to add her married name, don't add it. If you don't want to add an additional child, don't add it. Like, you just kind of walk through that save process really intentionally and do that. That way your information in your tree stays clean. Because one of the things that I see happen and trip up a lot of new people, and even some of us who are more experienced, is when we weren't careful about how we saved information to our tree, and then that plays into our bias. We have information in our tree now that we think we've proven when we haven't proven it, and it sends us down a rabbit hole that is sometimes a total wrong path, sometimes even connecting us to the entire wrong families. So again, Angie, thank you so much, not just for the advice, but for the beautiful example of how we can all, I think, piece together evidence better. I think you're going to see a lot of people cheering about how they're breaking through their female brick walls very
Well,
soon.
thank you for having me. I know we at ProGen are excited to kind of share some of our expertise with everyone out there who are subscribers, and hopefully it gives them some inspiration to break through those brick walls and add to their family story.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Okay, for all of you, thank you so much for joining us. Before you go, if you would please just in the chat, let us know one new thing you learned today. That's good for us to know what you're learning. It's also good for you to type it out. You're more likely to remember it. Until next time, I'm Krista Cowan. Thank you again to Angie Bush for joining us. Have fun climbing your family tree.